The alpha boss had been drugged. As his beta assistant, Charles rushed in completely off guard. This triggered a secondary presentation, and the assistant ended up riding his boss all night long. Now, to keep his job and his life, Charles was desperately trying to cover his tracks. Mr. Angus, it's been over a month, and the Omega from that night surely knows their mistake and has gone into hiding. You're a magnanimous alpha. Why not just let it go? Behind the massive desk, Angus narrowed his slender eyes. His inescapable gaze pinned Charles down like a physical weight. Speaking up for them like this, does my assistant know this person? The deep, suspicious tone made Charles' heart pound like a drum. Suppressing a secret, faint itch at the back of his neck, he braced himself against the scrutinizing look and waved his hands frantically. I don't know them at all. I was just worried you might take matters into your own hands and get penalized by the Alliance. Angus' knuckle-prominent fingers gripped his fountain pen so hard it clicked, while a cold sneer tugged at his taut jawline. Omegas are rare, and just because they can have kids, the Alliance treats them like treasures. Then what are we alphas? I kept myself pure. The sheer resentment of being used without his consent practically formed a tangible dark cloud over his head. Charles couldn't listen to this anymore and, for the first time ever, interrupted the domineering boss pity party. Don't you suspect it could have been an alpha or a beta that night? You were completely unconscious, after all. Angus shot him a speechless look, as if looking at a fool. Charles, did your gym teacher teach you biology? The pheromones of an alpha in rut only attract omegas. Our own kind would just feel sick, and a beta is as unresponsive as a log. Besides, my nose is never wrong. He leaned in slightly, his sharp aura closing the distance instantly, his words heavily punctuated. The thick, sticky, intoxicating honey pheromone from that night, sweet enough to drown in, could never belong to a rough alpha, and a beta is even more impossible. Drag that shameless Omega out into the light as soon as possible. Charles nodded obediently on the surface. But the moment he slipped back to his cubicle, his fingers flew across the keyboard, frantically deleting the security footage from that night. Right before clocking out, a message from Angus popped up on his screen. A friend gave me 2 vouchers for a 5-star restaurant. Let's go. The boss' friends really had no tact, knowing he was single yet always giving him paired gifts like mugs, pens, and watches. Normally, Charles would absolutely embrace the spirit of not wasting anything and happily mooch an expensive meal off his boss. But not today. The faint blue light of the screen illuminated Charles' slightly pale face. His fingertips trembled as he unconsciously touched the back of his neck. Beneath the skin that was supposed to be smooth, a cluster of dark, intensely hot fire was beating restlessly. Enduring the increasingly distinct swelling of his gland, he typed out a reply. Sorry, I have plans tonight. Also, I'd like to take tomorrow off. The chat window was instantly bombarded. What plans? Why are you taking time off? Who are you going with and where? Oh, it's not that I want to know, but approving leave requires going through the OA system, so I need a valid reason. Charles stared at the rapid-fire, gossipy interrogation on the screen. Before he could even roll his eyes, he caught a tall, dark shadow in his peripheral vision. A strong draft belonging to a top-tier alpha, wrapped in a biting, icy lime scent, suddenly surged over him with an inescapable domination. Angus had teleported to his side at some unknown point, his tall frame leaning in slightly, aggressively trying to peek at the monitor. Charles slapped the screen off with lightning speed and blurted out the first excuse he could think of. My mom set me up on a blind date. The surrounding temperature instantly dropped to freezing. The curve of Angus' mouth vanished, and a dangerous glint flashed in his deep eyes. Forgot to mention, a project needs to wrap up tonight, so the whole company is working overtime. No way. If he stayed any longer, this out-of-control honey scent would absolutely expose him on the spot. Charles bit his pale lower lip, cold sweat beading on his forehead. Then I'll use my annual leave. Sprained my wrist, can't sign off on it. Then mark me as absent. Angus furrowed his brows, staring at him in sheer disbelief. You used to drag yourself to your desk with a fever just for triple pay. And now for some blind date you've never even met. You're abandoning me? Abandoning your work. Charles knew he was in the wrong, and was just about to brush it off when a sharp cramp twisted deep in his lower abdomen. It felt like someone had dropped a red-hot coal right onto the gland at the back of his neck, burning so hot it could sear right through his skin. The sweet, cloying honey scent that had been desperately suppressed was now screaming through his open pores, threatening to break through his defenses. It was too late. Before the first hint of sweetness could spill out, Charles' face paled drastically. He shoved away that solid chest and stumbled frantically out of the office doors. The pungent smell of disinfectant temporarily calmed the panic in his chest. After emergency treatment, the unnatural, searing heat radiating from Charles' neck finally ebbed away. The doctor held the lab results, a sympathetic look in his eyes behind his glasses. Pheromone disorder. Charles felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over his head. In the Abo universe, this meant he could unexpectedly drop into heat at any given time, anywhere. Can it be cured? He asked, gripping the hem of his shirt tightly. Yes, the doctor pushed up his glasses, but the medication you just drank will only suppress it temporarily. What really works is a heavy-duty injection. However, this drug is extremely potent and will induce a miscarriage. Treat the illness, or have the baby. You can only choose one. I choose the treatment. Charles didn't hesitate, his eyes filled with a desperate resolve. But the doctor sighed, his gaze sweeping over Charles' flat stomach. Your secondary presentation was prematurely triggered by an extremely high concentration of alpha pheromones, and your reproductive cavity hasn't fully developed yet. If you forcefully terminate the pregnancy now, you have to wait 3 months. Otherwise, it will cause irreversible, tearing damage to your body. Then what am I supposed to do for the next 3 months? Charles' eyes grew red with panic, his fingers crumpling the paper. The emergency meds won't hold out for long. It's simple. The doctor casually offered a fatal suggestion. Right before an episode hits, have your partner bite your gland and inject a massive amount of alpha pheromones to suppress it. Seeing Charles' face turn ashen instantly, the doctor raised an eyebrow in confusion. Is that tricky? Could it be that your alpha is impotent? To protect the monumental lie of his wild night with his boss, Charles could only force a smile uglier than crying, brushing it off with bitter resentment. No, Hez just strictly platonic. The doctor's eyes immediately exploded with a brilliant academic frenzy. He whipped out his fountain pen, staring at Charles with a burning gaze. Platonic? What kind of new position is that? It actually managed to get a defective Omega like you, with an underdeveloped reproductive cavity, successfully pregnant? Hurry, give me all the details. If I put this in my core research paper, it'll absolutely list you as the second author in the Psi Index. Listening to the rapid clicking of the pen right next to his ear, Charles stood frozen, utterly speechless at the heavens. The drinking party a month ago was the beginning of this entire absurdity. That night, right after dropping off a drunk Angus at his villa, Charles had barely stepped through his own front door when his phone blew up with desperate texts from his boss. The drink was drugged. Come back and take me to the hospital. The miserable beta corporate drone could only accept his fate and turn around. The moment he pushed open the villa's heavy wooden doors, an overwhelmingly intense lime scent shattered the surrounding air like a burst of freezing water. As a beta who was chronically immune to pheromones, Charles was completely oblivious at the time. Like an idiot, he even took a deep sniff, his nostrils flaring slightly. Wicked capitalists. Even their indoor aromatherapy is so high-end, it's actually pretty intoxicating. But the further he walked up to the second floor, the stranger the scent became. When he pushed open the ajar bedroom door, that lime aroma had morphed into a thick, tart sap. Carrying an unnaturally scalding heat, it acted like countless invisible, slippery vines, winding tightly around Charles' ankles and ruthlessly drilling into every one of his pores. By the time Charles realized what was happening, it was too late. A sharp, piercing pain suddenly erupted from his smooth nape. The gland swelled and heated up instantly, like a sponge soaked full. The omnipresent lime pheromone tore away its refreshing disguise, turning into a lethal, potent aphrodisiac that stripped all the oxygen from the room. The string of his sanity snapped. His brain plunged into dizzying hypoxia. Following the most primal screams from deep within his body, Charles stumbled and groped his way to the edge of the large bed. On the mattress, Angus was unconscious from the drugs, faint veins protruding on his long neck. Caught in the throes of his presentation heat, Charles pounced with reddened eyes. For that entire night, The newly presented Omega, completely dominated by his instincts, treated his usually aloof, ill-tempered boss as the perfect antidote, so euphoric he forgot his own name. It wasn't until the sky began to lighten that the wildfire inside him finally burned out. Charles opened his eyes, and when his gaze met the face of the ruthless tyrant who absolutely despised Omegas lying next to him, his bones turned to ice in sheer terror. If the boss found out that his most capable subordinate not only presented as the Omega he hated most, but also had the sheer audacity to ride him all night long, he would absolutely be minced into meat paste on the spot. Ignoring his aching, weak body, Charles scrambled and crawled as he fled the scene. Because he ran in such a panic, he didn't even dare to take a shower. Who could have guessed that this 1 in 100 jackpot would land squarely on his head? A gust of cold wind snapped him out of his memories. Stepping out of the taxi from the hospital, Charles looked up, only to see the god of doom himself standing at the entrance of his apartment complex, arms crossed and face dark like a menacing gargoyle. "Mr. Angus? What are you doing here?" Charles jumped in fright, his fingertips trembling violently. Like a reflex, he shoved the medical report deep into the inner pocket of his trench coat, clutching his chest tightly with both hands. Angus closed the distance with his long legs. His striking features were cloaked in the dim, amber shadows of the streetlights, his mouth pulling into a highly sarcastic smirk. "Guarding against a thief? You just met for the first time, and you're already clutching whatever junk he gave you like a treasure." If that alpha knew, he'd probably wake up laughing in his sleep. He stared down at Charles condescendingly, his tone dripping with sour dissatisfaction. "Not to be overly critical, but the guy you went on a date with is basically trash. It's so late, and he actually felt fine letting you take a cab home alone. Unlike me, who personally drives you right to your building every time we work overtime, and even pays out of pocket to order Michelin-starred takeout for your late-night snack." Accompanied by this insanely bitter rambling, Angus skillfully pulled a bottle of odor-neutralizing spray from his pocket. "You reek of gunpowder pheromones. It's disgusting. Lime is so much cleaner. Let's spray a bit more to wash out your polluted nose." This familiar routine made Charles close his eyes with practiced ease, spreading his arms like an emotionless mannequin. "Psst, psst." Angus sprayed him from head to toe like a professional exterminator. The man was a severe germaphobe, and every time Charles finished dealing with other alpha clients, Angus would pull a long face, whip out this custom-made lime spray, and give him a comprehensive physical purification. "Mr. Angus, coming to find me in the middle of the night. What's the emergency?" Angus didn't answer, simply continuing to pump the spray nozzle wordlessly. The synthetic lime scent grew thicker, acting like a precision key that instantly unlocked the floodgates of that absurd night in Charles' mind. In those flashes of memory, he was straddling Angus, taking with greedy abandon. And the man who was normally so cold and abstinent had his muscles drawn tight at the climax, his Adam's apple bobbing sharply, leaking sexy ragged pants through clenched teeth. "Why is your face so red?" The deep voice suddenly blasted next to his ear. "Charles, do you have a fever?" A slightly cool, large palm suddenly pressed against Charles' forehead. He snapped his eyes open, caught completely off guard, as he crashed into those bottomless dark eyes. Angus visually stunning, handsome face instantly magnified in his vision, the distance between them so close their shoes were touching. The night breeze blew past. This time, what filled his lungs wasn't the cold, stinging mist of an industrial spray, but the real, warm pheromones seeping from the gland at the back of Angus' neck. A lime scent carrying body heat, just like that night when it poured into his body, scalding and domineering. Boom! The last shred of clarity in Charles' mind instantly exploded into fireworks. His heartbeat drummed madly against his eardrums. He turned as red as a boiled shrimp, from his neck all the way to the tips of his ears, his body temperature spiking so fast he felt like he might spontaneously combust. "Why are you burning like a furnace?" "Get in the car. I'm taking you to the hospital." Angus frowned, reaching out a long arm to grab his wrist. "No, no, no." Charles scrambled back as if electrocuted. Biting his lower lip hard, he babbled lies loudly, even his eyelashes trembling furiously. "Mr. Angus, you misunderstood. I don't have a fever. I'm angry." Yes, I'm just flushed with anger. He stared fixedly at his shadow on the ground, his chest heaving violently, as if he would suffocate in the next second. Am angry because that alpha's scent was so foul. Angry that I was almost blind enough to like him. Thanks to your warning, I'm going upstairs right now to block his number. Hearing this absolutely shameless flattery, Angus' tense jawline finally relaxed. He raised an eyebrow, unable to stop the smug curve at the corner of his lips. At least you have some sense. He elegantly adjusted his cuffs. I'll forgive you this time. Remember to tell your mother that unless she finds a top-tier alpha like me, you shouldn't go on any blind dates. It's a pure waste of time. After coaxing away this menacing deity, Charles sprinted all the way home and slammed open his bathroom door. Splash! Freezing water streamed down his bright red cheeks and into the sink. Gripping the marble counter tightly with both hands, Charles stared at himself in the mirror, eyes flushed red, drenched in sweat. His scorching breaths hit the glass, forming a hazy layer of steam. What kind of cheap deodorant was Mr. Angus spraying earlier? His legs were so weak they shook, and the skin on the back of his neck still tingled strangely. Why did it make my whole body feel like it was on fire? For Charles, who consistently scored 0 in biology and knew absolutely nothing about pheromones, he had no idea this was called physiological arousal triggered by the teasing of top-tier alpha pheromones. He just scrubbed his flushed skin until it was raw, wailing in despair. Being a little Omega is going to end me. Do I have to sweat like a sauna every time I talk to an alpha up close? To prevent unexpectedly slipping into heat in public, Charles securely fastened a cool gray pheromone monitoring band tightly around his wrist. A few days later in the conference room, the crowd dispersed, leaving only the two of them in the massive space. Charles. Angus crossed his long legs, his gaze locking onto him like a precision radar. You check your wrist every 9 minutes and 28 seconds. Are you waiting for some vital intelligence? Caught slacking off on the spot, Charles desperately needed to save his 50,000 yuan monthly bonus. Thinking on his feet, he lied through his teeth. You misunderstood. I'm waiting for the tech department to send over the recovered security footage from that night. As soon as the words left his mouth, the surrounding air froze. Angus' face visibly fell, his aloof, domineering CEO aura shattering into pieces, making him look exactly like a deeply wronged, resentful spouse. I was taken advantage of. The tall alpha lowered his thick eyelashes. I firmly believe you were the victim. I scrubbed myself in the shower for 3 straight hours, rubbed my skin raw, and am not dirty at all now. Charles' heart gave a violent lurch, his scalp tingling. Just hearing it made him hurt for his boss. As the main culprit, he absolutely belonged in hell. But wasn't discussing shower routines with his boss a little too intimate? The guilty beta could only nod furiously. Yes, Mr. Angus. It's all that shameless Omega's fault. You are pure and untainted. Then, Angus slowly lifted his eyelids. Those normally inescapable dark eyes now held a suffocating hint of caution. He gripped his custom pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. His handsome lips parted and closed several times before he asked in a very low voice, "They say an alpha loses his value once he loses his first time. Charles, do you look down on me for not being a virgin anymore?" A million question marks instantly popped up in Charles' head. Look down on him for what? He was the one who got the free ride. Even though it was full autopilot that night, exhausting and hard on his waist, he definitely enjoyed the hell out of it. Too cowardly to admit the truth, he could only scramble for words like an absolute scumbag. How could I ever look down on you? In my heart, you will always be flawless and incredibly charming. You're the dream alpha for billions of omegas and betas. Hearing this guarantee, Angus visibly let out a long sigh of relief, his broad, tense back relaxing along with it. Then what do you think? He leaned forward slightly. The irresistible magnetism of a top-tier alpha quietly invaded Charles' breathing space. If I were to pursue a beta, what are my chances of success? As long as the person isn't an idiot, 100%. Charles declared firmly. Angus was uncharacteristically silent. After a long moment, his Adam's apple bobbed heavily, his eyes turning dark and profound. What if that little beta is a blockhead, completely oblivious to my desperate wooing? Ha! Charles couldn't hold back a scoff. In this world, to be pursued by an apex alpha like Angus and not even realize it, that beta's IQ was probably on par with a toddler's slipper. Looking at his clumsily in love boss, Charles cleared his throat and started sharing his secrets with sincere eyes. Mr. Angus, you are an S-class alpha. Your looks and wealth are top tier, and even those pecs under your shirt are huge. Listen to me. Just aggressively show off your wealth, transfer him directly to your side, and then use your good looks in a variety of ways to keep him thoroughly locked down. How could he not fall for you? As his voice faded, the air fell into a heart-stopping, dead silence. Angus didn't speak. He simply stared straight at the proud little assistant in front of him, with a scalding, bottomless gaze, as if he were going to devour his prey whole in the very next second. Slowly, a highly dangerous and fiercely determined smirk curled at the corners of the alpha's mouth. So, you like this approach? Leaving the CEO's office, Charles slumped back into his ergonomic chair, his fingers unconsciously gripping the fabric over his chest. At the thought of Angus looking at another beta with that scalding gaze, his chest felt like it was stuffed with a cheap, waterlogged sponge, leaving him breathless. But this sour feeling didn't last long, because not even a strange mosquito appeared by Angus' side. He remained steadfast in driving Charles to Michelin-starred restaurants and showing off his rotating fleet of luxury cars, until the roaring engine tore through the tranquility of the mountain estate. Steering his Bugatti with one hand, Angus drove Charles around his newly purchased 1,000-square-meter villa for the third time. Charles finally reached his limit. Sporting wind-mussed hair, he shot him a resentful, dead fish glare. "Mr. Angus, I know you're filthy rich, but flexing this hard on a lowly corporate drone who only makes 50 grand a month, playing these show-off games, isn't that a bit malicious?" Screech! The supercar slammed on its brakes. Angus' long fingers froze on the steering wheel as he turned his head in utter disbelief, his deep dark eyes locking onto Charles' incredibly sincere face. After a long while, he frustratingly rubbed his throbbing temples, sinking into a suffocating silence. That night, Charles opened the new gift from his boss at home. It wasn't a gold watch or a fountain pen. Instead, resting perfectly centered on a premium velvet cushion was a solid wooden blockhead mallet. His phone screen lit up. Take it literally. Charles stared at the screen, head full of questions, feeling that a top-tier alpha's mind was harder to predict than a mosquito in heat. Fortunately, the next day, the boss drove his low-key Maybach again, but the entire executive office had completely erupted. Look, a deep V burgundy silk shirt. It's even better than yesterday's tailored black lace. My God, look at those bursting pecs. Is the boss planning to debut in a host club? I'd steal my husband's secret stash just to tip him. I wonder if he stepped on me with those red-soled shoes, how good that would feel. Under the baptism of swallowed saliva and burning stares, Angus didn't even blink. He strode over to Charles' desk with his long legs and backhanded the glass door shut with a loud bang, completely isolating all the gossiping eyes. His tall frame leaned over the desk with an undeniable, irresistible magnetism. Angus tilted his head slightly, his thin lips radiating searing body heat, barely brushing past Charles' ear. His deep voice seemed to carry an electric charge. "Charles, book 2 flight tickets. You're coming with me on a business trip to City A this afternoon." Charles didn't hear a single word of that sexy directive. His eyes were completely out of control, tracing down the man's elegantly bobbing Adam's apple. His gaze glued itself deep into that wide-open collar. Firm pectoral muscles played peek-a-boo beneath the burgundy silk. Uncontrollably, his mind flashed back to that night, how he had lost control and bitten down on those scorching muscles that were hot, bouncy, and soft. Gulp. Staring blankly at the glorious view, Charles swallowed a huge mouthful of saliva. He completely failed to notice that above him, the corners of Angus' mouth were lifting wildly, his eyes flashing with the dark thrill of a successful hunt. That afternoon, right before departure, bzz bzz. The monitor band on his wrist suddenly vibrated furiously, piercing red light flashing wildly as the screen's numbers instantly spiked to 70. Charles' pupils contracted sharply. He abruptly stood up, bolted to the restroom, and locked himself in a stall. With trembling hands, he ripped off the hot, softening old inhibitor patch from the back of his neck. A cloyingly sweet, outrageously thick honey scent nearly tore through his skin along with his boiling blood, ready to erupt. Tilting his head back, he roughly chugged down the 5th bottle of bitter emergency medication, forcefully suppressing the restless surge. Damn it. Charles frustratedly tugged at his hair, cold sweat dripping down his pale jawline. The doctor had warned him that after the seventh bottle, his body would develop a resistance to the drug. He clearly hadn't done anything these past few days, so why were his pheromones spiraling out of control so fast? On his phone screen, the search results stung his eyes. Pregnant Omega suffering from pheromone disorder will develop a pathological extreme thirst for alpha pheromones, requiring the partner to directly inject a high concentration of pheromones for deep soothing. Charles stared intensely at the search result about a heat Omega's pathological thirst, cold sweat almost soaking through his back. Before he could recover from the shadow of this ticking time bomb, the flight took off, and with a sweet, professional smile, the flight attendant escorted him from the cramped economy class all the way into first class. No need to guess, this was definitely Angus doing. Why did you book economy? Charles slowly sank into the plush airline seat. How could he dare confess that he was terrified of his pheromone disorder and was afraid he wouldn't be able to resist jumping his boss thousands of feet in the air? He could only bite the bullet and lie. I just felt embarrassed relying on you so much, Mr. Angus. I thought it was something serious. A warm, large hand rested on top of Charles' head, gently ruffling his hair. The cabin's warm yellow reading light cast a glow on Angus' handsome profile, and behind gold-rimmed glasses, those peach blossom eyes curved slightly, his deep pupils flowing with an unyielding tenderness. Charles, rely on me all you want. Otherwise, it just means I'm useless. The feeling of weightlessness struck suddenly as the plane pierced through the clouds. Charles' heart skipped a beat, then began hammering madly in his chest with a heavy, passionate rhythm that almost shattered his eardrums. We still have 2 hours. Get some sleep first. A suit jacket carrying body heat draped over him. That familiar lime pheromone was no longer ferocious like that night. Instead, it transformed into a warm, soft, invisible net, wrapping Charles up seamlessly. The crisp scent slid smoothly down his nasal cavity into his lungs, magically soothing the restlessness in his gland. Charles, whose nerves had been completely taut, actually drifted into a deep sleep surrounded by this scent of absolute safety. Calling it a business trip was a stretch. Charles felt more like a kept trophy accessory. From carrying luggage to business negotiations, Angus single-handedly dominated the entire field. At the dinner party, this cold-faced boss even held a wine glass in one hand, toasting with partners, while accurately spinning the glass turntable with the other, smoothly delivering the thickest cuts of salmon right in front of Charles. While Charles was busy burying his head in food, he caught the hushed giggles of 2 female executives sitting opposite him. First time seeing a tyrant boss block drinks for his little assistant. I'm already standing this couple. These clueless betas are the hottest. Because they can't be completely marked, an alpha will only act crazier and rougher when they do it, marinating him entirely in pheromones until he's red-eyed, shaking and begging for mercy, finally pushing him until his eyes glaze over. The whispers gradually faded into wild, bizarre laughter. Chewing on a mouthful of salmon, Charles didn't even have the time to process their indecent remarks. Just then, the heavy mahogany door of the private room swung open, and a tall, striking figure strode in. Apologies, everyone. Got held up in traffic. I'll punish myself with a drink. The man picked up a glass of strong liquor and downed it in one shot. The partner's boss immediately stood up to introduce him. Mr. Angus, this is Brent, the spokesperson for our new ad campaign. Brent? The moment the man took off his sunglasses, a flashy, intense rose pheromone exploded like a bottle of red wine, instantly overpowering the smell of smoke and alcohol in the room. The scent was highly aggressive, plunging straight into their senses like a gorgeous bouquet of thorns. Charles gasped. A live A-list idol. So handsome. He clamped both hands over his mouth, his eyes instantly shooting out fanatical stars. His burning gaze was glued to Brent's long, straight legs and pale skin, reluctant to even blink. He completely failed to notice that right beside him, Angus' long fingers, originally extended for a handshake, froze midair, and then, his knuckles turning white, he slowly pulled his hand back. Mr. Angus, Brent is so handsome. Charles excitedly elbowed his boss' arm, but received no response. Super handsome. Devastatingly handsome. Still dead silence. His legs are so long, and his skin is so pale. Was that rose scent earlier his pheromones, or just perfume? It smells so good it should be illegal. I absolutely have to buy a bottle of the same brand tomorrow. Boss, since we're working with him, it's not too much to ask for an autograph and a photo, right? Flush with excitement, Charles grabbed his phone, ready to dash across the table. Clack. Angus' chopsticks slammed heavily against his porcelain bowl, producing a crisp sound that made hearts tremble. He stood up abruptly, his jawline drawn tight as a bowstring, and his eyes cold enough to drop ice shards. Apologies. There's an emergency at the company. Please, enjoy your meal. Head back to the hotel to handle it. Before his voice even fell, that large, knobby hand clamped down on Charles' wrist like an iron vice, dragging him out with reckless abandon. Hey, Mr. Angus. There is no message in the company group chat. Wait, let me get an autograph first. Angus said nothing, his strides massive. In the final second before the door clicked shut, those eerie, bizarre chuckles floated out from the private room again. Tisk, tisk, someone's going to get punished tonight. Slam! Charles was unceremoniously stuffed into the Maybach's passenger seat. The driver mercilessly shooed away. The car shot into the night like an arrow leaving the string, and even after driving quite a distance, Charles was still plastered against the window, looking back longingly. What a pity, right? A sinister, low voice drifted from the driver's seat. Inside the cramped cabin, the originally gentle lime pheromones now felt like a Siberian cold front. Wrapped in extreme irritation and tyrannical possessiveness, they weighed heavily on the leather seats, almost stripping all the oxygen from the air. Do you want me to drive you back? Really? Charles' eyes instantly lit up like 200-watt bulbs as he turned his head, shouting excitedly, "Thank you, Mr. Angus. You're a living saint. And while we're at it, can you help me get an auto?" Screech. Ear-piercing brakes tore through the night sky as the Maybach jerked to a violent halt at a traffic light. Angus yanked his tie loose and viciously tossed it into the back seat. He turned sideways, a violent dark fire burning in his eyes as his long, powerful fingers ruthlessly pinched the soft flesh of Charles' cheek, stretching it outward as he squeezed words through his teeth. "Charles, sometimes I really want to take a needle and sew your mouth shut." Ah? Charles' cheek was pinched out of shape, his clear eyes full of idiotic bewilderment. Is it because I ate too much tonight, making your wallet hurt? But I only had 5 bites of salmon, 5 crabs, 3 bowls of sweet soup, and 26 mantis shrimp. I didn't even grab a bowl of rice. Angus ground his back teeth, and outraged by this impenetrable logic, he actually laughed out loud on the spot. You didn't have any rice, so you feel pretty wronged, don't you? Charles nodded obediently. Yup, forget it. Angus let go, and looking at that face marked with red pinches, the violence in his eyes miraculously dissipated. He sighed as if accepting his fate, his thumb gently rubbing over the red marks. Why am I even arguing with a bottomless pit whose brain is entirely filled with food? Seeing his boss mood shift from stormy to cloudy, Charles immediately seized the chance. Then, Mr. Angus, can you take me back to see Brent now? 2 cool fingers instantly pinched Charles' chin. Angus leaned in slightly, the dominating lime scent firmly pinning him against the passenger seat. That peerlessly handsome face wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Charles, say one more word, and your entire year-end bonus goes back to 0. Charles gasped, clapping both hands tightly over his mouth. Damn it! This wicked capitalist actually had him by the throat. After hustling all day, Charles threw himself into the hotel bathtub for a thorough soak. Thinking he could get through tonight safely, he didn't even put on that suffocating inhibitor patch. Who knew that just as he was brewing up some drowsiness, the phone by his pillow would vibrate furiously like a death warrant? Charles, I slipped in the bathroom. Come help me up. Through the phone, the man's voice carried a hint of weakness. Terrified, Charles scrambled and crawled, sprinting next door without even putting on his shoes. The room door was wide open, and he stormed into the bathroom like a gust of wind, only to witness a scene that left him utterly speechless. He claimed he slipped, yet Angus was sprawled, spread eagle on a completely bone-dry floor. This deeply calculating top-tier alpha had a precariously loose towel draped around his waist. Crystal clear water drops trickled down his dark bangs, sliding past full, pale pecs, trailing along the deep grooves of his abs, all the way into the secret territory at the edge of the towel. Twisted my ankle, it hurts. A flash of slyness crossed Angus' eyes, and taking advantage of the moment, his large frame slumped limply against Charles. Not only did he lean in, but he also grabbed Charles' stiff hand, pressing it against the distinct ridges of his obliques, guiding that hand slowly downward. Beneath his palm, the alpha's taut muscles felt like obsidian hiding molten lava, warm, flexible, and extremely firm. Charles' brain buzzed, and his fingertips couldn't help but curl slightly. This texture, not only had he touched it, he had ridden it. He knew better than anyone just how incredible that astounding explosive power felt. At that thought, a flush of wildly inappropriate desires instantly crawled all over his neck. Great, Charles stammered, his eyes darting away wildly. Angus pushed his luck even further, tilting his head slightly. His thin lips, carrying a damp mist, lightly grazed Charles' sensitive earlobe, and his tone was lazy and drawn out, like a feather equipped with a hook. Then, "Why is Charles too afraid to look at me?" Whoosh! A scorching breath enveloped in a crisp lime scent blew against his ear. Triggered as if by an electric shock, Charles jerked violently. Wham! His left foot tripped over his right, and he threw himself completely forward, the two of them crashing heavily onto the floor. As luck would have it, Charles' mouth landed with pinpoint accuracy right onto that incredibly bouncy pectoral muscle. In sheer panic, his body acted faster than his brain, and he subconsciously sucked on it hard. Nah. Angus Adams' apple bobbed wildly, and he firmly clamped down on Charles' lower back. That deadly, sexy horse pant smashed right against Charles' eardrums, making his scalp tingle. "Charles, you bite so." Beep, 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 beep. A piercing red light and the frantic blaring of the wristband alarm instantly shattered the sizzling tension in the bathroom. Before Charles could scramble up, Angus' nostrils flared slightly. Without the inhibitor patch to seal it in, a thick, sticky, outrageously sweet honey scent surged frantically from Charles' hot nape like a burst dam of syrup. Carrying the warm softness and submission unique to Omegas, the aroma instantly filled the air of the bathroom, so sweet it made one's fingertips go numb. Angus' eyes immediately grew dark and glazed. He buried his face heavily into the crook of Charles' neck, taking a deep breath of that lethal sweet fragrance, letting out a sigh of bone-deep intoxication. "Charles, have you been drinking honey water? You smell so good." His nose roamed greedily near the gland, his voice growing hoarser, and, "It smells so familiar." That word familiar scared Charles so badly his heart stopped, cold sweat instantly drenching his pajamas. It was over. If this Omega-despising boss found out he was the lunatic who stole his virginity, he would absolutely have his tendons pulled and his skin flayed. There were still thousands of cuisines in the Alliance he hadn't tasted yet. He didn't want to die. Extreme panic unlocked the true potential of a corporate slave. Clenching his back teeth tight, under Angus' dazed and intoxicated gaze, Charles forcefully threw his head up. Thwack! A heavy, incredibly forceful headbutt slammed right onto the boss' noble skull. Angus didn't even utter a groan. His eyes closed, and he passed out cold on the spot. The great missing person escape began right then. Charles frantically rolled up some clothes, bought a ticket overnight to flee back to City B, and then scrambled into a taxi to hide in City C. He didn't even dare write a resignation letter, and like a frightened bird startled by the twang of a bow, Charles holed up in a rundown, off the Books motel. He cowered under the covers, playing dead in absolute terror until the next evening. Just as a starving Charles unlocked his phone to order food, his screen was instantly carpet-bombed by Angus messages. "You just left me naked on the floor for the entire night? Why did you headbutt me? Speak. Give me a proper reason, and I might just be merciful enough to overlook your insubordination this time." Charles gulped, scrolling down with a trembling finger, and following that was a string of furious bomb emojis before the tone took a sharp turn. "Where is my underwear? The ones I just took off and all the new ones in my suitcase. How are they all gone? The front desk said no housekeeping went in. Did you take them? Charles, what exactly is the meaning of you fleeing in the night with my underwear? My good assistant, I'm begging you, don't pull this kind of prank. Can you please give my underwear back? I have a flight to catch, and I don't have time to buy any right now. The feeling of not having underwear to catch me is genuinely terrifying. Underwear? Charles stiffly twisted his neck, his gaze shifting inch by inch, finally locking onto a crumpled, black and gray mysterious fabric balled up next to his pillow. He extended violently, shaking fingertips, carefully peeling the fabric open. Boom! The sky fell. When his pheromone disorder triggered completely last night, every drop of blood in his body was screaming for a top-tier alpha's comfort. As he fled blindly from Angus' bathroom, he acted just like a pervert, driven entirely by instinct to swipe the piece of clothing in the room that held the highest concentration of Lyme pheromones and the most intense male hormones. He honestly thought it was a bespoke vest, and in his getaway cab, he had even buried his face deep into it and sniffed furiously. Even when he slept last night, he gripped this piece of fabric tightly against his nose, desperately breathing it in like oxygen. But now his retinas were honestly telling him this was a pair of men's briefs. The highly aggressive lime scent on it, mixed with the memory of the alpha's searing body heat, stabbed into his nerves like a barrage of barbs. No wonder the cab driver and the motel owner last night looked utterly terrified and clutched their pants while backing away furiously the moment he approached. Dear God, just send down a lightning bolt and strike me dead. Charles roared in a complete breakdown, smashing his burning crimson face into the pillow. The phone screen glowed faintly, displaying endless messages from Angus demanding to know where he had gone. Staring at the screen, Charles ground his teeth, deciding he absolutely could not gamble his life on this tyrant's mercy. With trembling hands, he swiftly typed out the words "I am sorry," then closed his eyes, instantly blocked all contact, and completely deleted his accounts. Before long, Charles was 3 months pregnant. Charles dawdled madly in his rented apartment, folding clothes, scrubbing shoe soles, and even zoning out while staring at half a plate of leftover fish, and it wasn't until 4:30 in the afternoon that he dragged his heavy feet to the hospital. When the pungent smell of disinfectant finally faded, and he pushed open the hospital doors to leave, the sky was already dark, and the neon lights of the street market were flashing wildly. The grievances of hiding in the shadows and living off bland boiled vegetables for over 40 days suddenly morphed into an earth-shattering craving in his stomach, and his hands moved as if free from his brain's control. 2 super supreme pizzas, 5 roasted pig trotters, 7 Boston lobsters, 30 giant skewers. In the food street, Charles used both hands, his cheeks bulging high like a remorseless paper shredder. His glossy, oily lips moved rapidly, and the heavy aroma of cumin and chili perfectly masked the honey scent on his body that was on the verge of losing control at any moment. His immersive feasting concluded, Charles waddled home with a round, bloated stomach, collapsed onto his bed, and plunged into a deep, carb-induced coma. He had absolutely no idea that his stunningly cute, oblivious face, stained with grease and eyes gleaming as he wildly gnawed on pig trotters, was currently making massive waves on the internet. In the dark, a faint blue phone screen flashed wildly, and the comment section had completely exploded. "Oh my God, is this pregnancy mukbang working this hard? Don't burst your stomach. You'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone." Creator reply, "Hez not doing a mukbang. There is no tripod around him. Hez literally just a starved ghost reincarnated. Is no one focusing on this Omega's looks? That bone structure is majestic. Literal CGI level divine beauty, except those eyes radiate a clear, unadulterated stupidity. Get lost. That is obviously my darling wife whom I haven't met yet. Are you alpha animals in heat completely blind? Hez pregnant, which clearly means he has a partner. So what if he has a partner? A good hoe can dig up any corner. I volunteer to be the stepdad. Once the baby is born, it can take my last name." In a luxury apartment in City A, a list idle Brent almost crushed his phone the instant he swiped onto that mukbang video. For the past 42 days, over 1,000 hours, he had been ruthlessly hunted down from every possible angle by Angus, who had essentially turned into a vengeful poltergeist. The tyrant would disguise himself as building management 1 minute, and the next, he would magically materialize from under the bed, the outdoor AC unit, or even a trash can, choking Brent with red-rimmed eyes while roaring, "Did you go see my wife? Give him back to me." Having developed severe PTSD from the torment, Brent wiped away tears of bitterness and tremblingly forwarded the video link to his boss, who was saved under the contact name, "Desperate Widower Who Lost His Wife, Dad. Now you believe I'm innocent, right? I didn't steal your wife. When can I have my endorsements back?" Early the next morning, Charles was huddled in the kitchen, reheating last night's leftovers. Suddenly, with a massive bang, the front door was kicked off its hinges, and Charles' pupils practically caused an earthquake in terror. His body moving faster than his brain, he scooped up his air fryer and darted under the dining table in a flash. 10 seconds later, through the billowing dust, a pair of highly imposing black leather shoes with red soles came into his line of sight. An incredibly furious, chilling lime pheromone, cold enough to freeze the air, swept through the entire room like a collapsing glacier. Before Charles could even snap back to reality, with half a flatbread still dangling from his mouth, his whole body was abruptly hoisted up from under the table by a pair of iron arms and slammed down onto the dining table with a heavy thud. Plop. The half-eaten flatbread dropped straight onto the man's incredibly expensive, bespoke trousers. 43 days. The towering shadow instantly engulfed Charles completely. Angus firmly braced both hands on the edge of the table, veins popping on the backs of his hands, and he practically crushed his back teeth as he spoke. "How did you manage to get even dumber?" Charles pinched his own thigh hard. It hurt. It wasn't a dream. His body went rigid, and just as he tried to slip away from underneath that highly aggressive embrace, his wrist was clamped tight by a sheer strength. "Why are you running?" The fury-laced lime scent was bone-chillingly cold, freezing the gland at the back of Charles' neck into a violent shudder and making it hard for him to even breathe. "You heartless creature, are you really trying to infuriate me to death?" Hearing that ferocious tone, Charles gritted his teeth, fully prepared to repeat his old trick, gift this tyrant another headbutt, and make a run for it. But the moment he jerked his face up, he was caught completely off guard, crashing right into Angus' heavily red-rimmed eyes. Those dark eyes that were always so aloof and superior were actually glimmering with tears, right on the verge of a breakdown. As if his heart had been ruthlessly crushed by an invisible hand, Charles was instantly drained of all his strength. After literally blinding the grieving landlord with a fat stack of cash, Angus simply bundled up this runaway Omega and stuffed him straight into the back seat of his Cullinan. The soundproof partition slowly rose, and in the enclosed, cramped cabin, the irritable lime scent and the cloyingly sweet, steamy honey aroma became completely entwined until even the air turned thick and scalding. Mixed within it all, utterly destroying the mood, was a faint trace of charred flatbread. Half an hour later, Charles swallowed his last bite of dry rations. Full? Beside him, Angus gave a cold sneer, slowly taking out his phone and shoved a piece of security footage directly in front of Charles' eyes. "Once you're full, it's time to settle our accounts." The video clearly showed the scene of Charles charging into the room that night with red eyes. There was no shameless, lunatic Omega that night. Angus turned slightly sideways, his hard, hormone-filled body pressing over him like a mountain, and his scalding breath hit the flushed tips of Charles' ears. "It was you." The pheromones already boiling and blending in the air were the most ironclad evidence, and any further excuses were useless. Charles nodded in despair, but a final trace of confusion lingered in his clear, idiotic eyes. "I clearly deleted the security footage." "How did you get it?" Angus played with his phone using his long fingers, a heavily sarcastic smirk pulling at his lips. "Because after you deleted the original file, you forgot to empty the recycle bin." Snap. The string in Charles' brain broke completely. Damn it, he got sloppy. Angus' long fingers swiped across the screen, pulling up the medical report he had intercepted from that doctor who smelled like gunpowder. His deep, dark eyes moved down inch by inch, his icy gaze scraping past the tortured, bare, unmarked gland on the back of Charles' neck, finally landing heavily on the slight bulge under his oversized t-shirt. A deathly silence filled the cabin. Angus took a deep breath, his jawline drawn incredibly tight, but his tone was terrifyingly calm. "So, you presented as an Omega, got pregnant with my child, and because the treatment conflicted with having the baby, and you were too afraid to confess and ask me for pheromones, you chose to vanish off the face of the earth?" Charles swallowed hard, his eyes turning red. Truly worthy of being the helmsman of a multi-billion-dollar empire, his logical deduction skills were a perfect 10. "I'm sorry, Mr. Angus. That night really was entirely my fault." He shrank into the corner, his voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "I didn't want to sleep with you either. But hitting my presentation and heat at the same time, and you just smelled so good, like a premium ready-to-eat snack. I really couldn't control myself. Just like right now." He was absolutely terrified of being tossed into the open ocean to feed the sharks, yet his body completely betrayed his reason, and that crisp, rich lime pheromone was tugging violently at his nerves, like countless invisible hands. A gorgeous, flushed red blossomed at the corners of Charles' eyes, and instead of retreating, he surrendered to instinct, initiating contact and clinging to him like a cat in heat. Straddling Angus' firm thighs directly, he buried his burning cheek deep into the broad crook of the man's neck, sniffing madly as if inhaling pure oxygen. "Mr. Angus, you smell so good, truly amazing." Crying tears of pure terror, Charles cupped the alpha's strikingly handsome face and clumsily pecked at his tightly pressed lips. "Mr. Angus, please give me some pheromones. I feel so awful, am going to die." Angus' jaw tensed, and his face dark. He turned his head away, stiffly dodging those soft, damp kisses. "Weren't you trying to run?" Dangerous dark waves churned in his black eyes, his voice as cold as ice. "Now, get the hell off my lap." Having stubbornly endured 42 days of pheromone disorder, Charles' mental string was already dangerously fragile. Now, lured by this high concentration of lime scent in a confined space, his sanity completely crashed, and burning all over, he acted like a fish out of water, squirming restlessly on Angus' lap. Failing to receive any soothing, Charles grew frantic. He grabbed the man's bespoke shirt and, right through the thin fabric, bit down viciously on that distinctly sculpted, massive pectoral muscle. N-N-I. Angus Adams' apple bobbed violently, letting out a suppressed grunt. The tone wasn't one of pain, but rather hinted at an extreme, scalp-tingling thrill, and his large hand firmly clamped down on the head thrashing in his arms, his voice completely raw. "Good boy, bite harder." When it was time to get out of the car, Charles clung tightly to Angus' neck like a koala, his legs wrapped securely around his strong waist, stubbornly refusing to let go. "Shh, so clingy." Angus complained verbally, yet his arms very naturally supported Charles behind, and carrying him exactly like that, kissing him passionately the whole way, he kicked open the villa door. Reap, the expensive fabric was violently torn apart. In the dark, Angus' voice was hoarse enough to bewitch the soul. "Be a good boy. If you want me to soothe you, beg me." In the very next second, sharp canines mercilessly pierced the fragile burning gland on the back of his neck. The furious lime pheromones crashed in like a burst dam, and carrying absolute suppression and comfort, it brutally washed over every one of Charles' fraying nerves. He arched his back sharply as if electrocuted, his vision blurring from the pain, and his hands gripped the bedsheets desperately in an attempt to escape. But the alpha behind him was like an inescapable net, locking him firmly in his embrace. "Don't cry." Scalding kisses fell on the corners of his eyes, carrying an undeniable dominance. "It'll feel good soon." After thoroughly enduring an intense session of physical therapy, the pheromone disorder that had been suppressed for over 3 months miraculously subsided. Wearing an ill-fitting, oversized pajama shirt, Charles stared blankly at the imperial feast laid out on the long table in front of him. Steaming chicken soup with goji berries, fragrant braised beef with potatoes, brightly colored cola chicken wings, premium bird's nest soup with fish maw, and umami-rich seafood congee. He couldn't stop his mouth from watering madly, but he didn't dare pick up his chopsticks, whispering timidly, "Mr. Angus, isn't making a last meal before execution this extravagant a bit too wasteful?" Charles. Across the table, Angus, who was drying his hair, took a deep breath, his back teeth grinding loudly together. "Sometimes I'm genuinely curious if that pretty head of yours is filled with water or tofu dregs." Charles' hand, which was just about to steal a chicken wing, froze abruptly. He looked up, his clear, foolish eyes instantly going wide in sheer terror. "You? Not only are you going to kill me, you're going to drown me?" He squeezed his eyes shut in despair. "Fine, I slept with you twice. It's only fair you dump my body in the ocean. But can I at least finish this meal before I die? I swear, give me 20 minutes, and I'll devour it all." Crack. The fork in Angus' hand snapped clean in two. The tyrant who dominated the business world was forced to leave the table, and he took 3 deep breaths by the floor-to-ceiling window before he barely suppressed the urge to strangle the idiot. Pulling out a chair, he sat down right next to Charles, his tone filled with a profound sense of helplessness and exhaustion. "Charles, I like you. I like you so much that the entire company knows. I like you so much that even the stray dogs on the street can see it. Did you really not notice it at all?" Boom! This explosive news was like a depth charge, completely blasting Charles' mind into a daze. his frontal lobe, busy trying to digest the chicken leg, furiously processed for several minutes before he slowly gaped open his mouth. So, you aren't going to chop me into pieces and feed me to the sharks? Is that the main point? Veins throbbed violently on Angus' forehead as he grabbed Charles' greasy chin. The main point is that I'm confessing my love to you. Watching Charles clutch his chest, eyes wide open in entirely petrified shock. Angus sighed in resignation, and as if doing a magic trick, his knobby, large hand pulled out a dazzling diamond ring from his suit pocket. Under the warm yellow light, those deep peach blossom eyes swirled with overflowing affection, firmly locking onto the prey in front of him. Even if a little fool like you doesn't know if you actually like me or not. The alpha's voice was low and slightly raspy, laced with utter temptation. Then let me put it another way. Are you willing to be with me for the rest of your life, through rich or poor, to always accept my care and patience, to have this child with me, and to start a family? Almost the very moment this solemn vow settled into the air, Charles blinked those clear, foolish eyes and blurted out, Haven't we always been like this? The air fell silent for a second, and Angus laughed out of sheer exasperation. Without another word, he seized Charles' hand, sliding the cool diamond ring roughly yet tenderly onto his ring finger. Immediately after, an overwhelming kiss carrying a fierce lime scent crashed down upon him. You little idiot. We're getting married. The night they got their marriage license, the wall clock had barely struck 8 when the main bedroom lights were mercilessly flipped off with a click. In the dark, it wasn't long after their sticky, scalding lips and tongues tangled that Charles couldn't handle the highly aggressive assault. His face bright red, he reached out to push the solid wall of muscle above him, panting heavily and protesting that he couldn't take it anymore. But the alpha's iron arms were like branding irons, clamping his slender, soft waist tightly. Angus chuckled low in his ear, his voice incredibly sexy. Wifey, this progress isn't even 1/10 of the time you spent going crazy on my buffet that night. Trying to run away already? Feeling guilty, Charles put on an act, squeezing out 2 fake tears to try and bluff his way through. Angus didn't buy it at all, his thumb lightly caressing the back of Charles' neck. That day at the hospital, why did you walk right up to the door of the abortion clinic, only to suddenly change your mind and run out? Was it because you actually fell in love with me long ago? And couldn't bear to get rid of my baby? As a traditional and incredibly thin-skinned newly presented Omega, Charles bit his crimson lower lip hard, far too embarrassed to say those cheesy words out loud. Seeing his flushed face playing dead, Angus narrowed his eyes dangerously, the lime scent instantly darkening. Don't want to say it? Fine. As it turned out, once a top-tier alpha decided to be utterly shameless, they were practically inhuman. Even with Charles using the unformed bump in his stomach as a get-out-of-jail-free card, Angus still had 10,000 ways to torment him. Wifey, you look so pitiful crying like this. The alpha's searing breath brushed against his neck, sparking a violent shiver. It just makes me even more excited. What should we do? His broken sobs were completely swallowed. The ripe gland on the back of his neck was accurately seized by sharp canines, wickedly sucked, ground against, and pierced over and over again. The intensely dominant lime scent acted like a surging wave, brutally smashing through his defenses to entirely envelop and grind down that sweet trace of honey. Under the intense heat, the 2 pheromones blended frantically, acting exactly like muddling a rich, scalding cup of honey lemonade that was so sweet it was cloying, and so tart it made his fingertips spasm. 5 months later, the 2 held a grand make-up wedding. Special Assistant Hunk, who had been inexplicably kicked out of the CEO's office to sit miserably in a regular cubicle ever since Charles got hired, was also there. Looking at Charles' slightly protruding pregnant belly, Hunk pushed up his glasses, his expression as calm as stagnant water. Charles widened his eyes, full of curiosity. Special Assistant Hunk, aren't you surprised that Mr. Angus and I are even having a baby? Hunk looked at him like he was an alien. Haven't you guys been dating this whole time? Getting pregnant and having a baby, isn't that just following the normal protocol? Charles was dumbfounded. Ah? We were dating? How come I didn't know I was in a relationship? When did you think you guys weren't dating? Hunk took a deep breath and began a furiously bitter rant, matching bespoke suits, limited edition couples watches. Every single damn task that belongs to the assistant was done by me. And you, your only job every day was accompanying the boss to Michelin-starred business lunches. And not only did you snag 50 grand a month for free, but you also got chauffeured around in a Rolls Royce every single day. Hunk sneered, dropping one final bombshell. Not to mention the moment Mr. Angus got your onboarding health report and saw that you, a beta, had a minuscule 1% chance of a secondary presentation into an omega, he immediately threw money to shut us all up, and he forced the entire company to get our stories straight and spread the rumor that the boss absolutely despises omegas, all because he was terrified someone else would snatch you away. The truth was finally out. So, all of this had been a long premeditated trap set by that cunning, two-faced tyrant. Touching his belly, Charles suddenly understood everything, realizing Angus had been craving his body since way back then. A bizarre sense of smugness instantly surged through him. To reward the alpha who had secretly been in love with him for so long, the generous Charles decided that night to brave his 5-month pregnant belly and willingly satisfy some of Angus' unspeakable, wicked desires. But he clearly severely underestimated how low an S-class alpha's boundaries could drop in bed. Ning. Angus. Not that. That's the baby's future food. You can't bite that. In the bedroom, Charles was so mortified he wanted to die, pushing against the fluffy head buried in his chest. The corners of his eyes flushed a burning crimson. Yet the alpha shamelessly buried himself even deeper. His warm breath brushed against the skin as he mumbled, his voice carrying utter wickedness and satisfaction. Can't hear you, my ears just went deaf.
Reading through this story, I was grinning from ear to ear the entire time. I absolutely love Charles as a character. He possesses a certain clear, unadulterated stupidity, and is a massive foodie as well as a total money grubber. Faced with the earth-shattering ordeal of accidentally sleeping with his aloof boss, suddenly presenting as an omega, and even getting pregnant, his first reaction isn't to stage some melodramatic, angsty romance. Instead, he just feels insanely guilty and desperately tries to keep his cover, terrified of losing his highly lucrative job. His thought process is always wildly out of the ordinary. When faced with the imminent threat of being silenced, his biggest concern is actually whether he can take 20 minutes to devour the massive feast right in front of him before he dies. On the flip side, we have Angus, the top-tier alpha boss. He acts incredibly domineering and cool in front of others, but around Charles he gets insanely jealous just because his assistant took a second look at a male celebrity. He even spams a string of frantic emojis over a missing pair of underwear. This massive contrast makes him both incredibly swoon-worthy and hilarious. The dynamic between these two is packed with countless side-splitting coincidences and genuinely heart-fluttering moments. The whole thing doesn't just feel incredibly relaxing and stress-relieving, it leaves you with a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for the channel. See you in the next one.